right, everybody. Happy to be here. See you all again. Good. Victor, Brian, everybody. So, come on, little television studio here. It takes a while to set it up. A little round light shining on me and another light shining on the Buddha. Okay. Well, we think we're going to, for this one little hour, we're going to have a chat using Buddha's view of the world, really, basically, isn't it? Using Buddha's view of the world and kind of trying to see how we can apply it in a very practical way in our daily life, And I always say, even if there's 1% of what you hear that's useful, amazing, put it into practice. So when I first listened to the Tibetan Buddhist teachings, when I was about 30 or something, 31, I simply couldn't believe this arcane, complex kind of concepts. I didn't know where to begin. And this is one of the commonest things that people feel when we contact Tibetan Buddhism, because it's such a vast, it's actually the big picture. Buddhism is a worldview. Buddha's not asking you to believe it, but it's a worldview that's been cultivated and developed and presented and studied. I mean, the Tibetan monastic university system, before the communists came running into Tibet and taking over, I'd say 1/6 of the population were in the monasteries, mostly men, of course. They're pretty patriarchal. They were, maybe, but anyway, that's another discussion. But well, actually, it's a good discussion. But it was like if you study in the monasteries, and many more and more people, so-called Western people, modern people are doing that now and getting their geshe degrees, becoming geshes. It's happening. I mean, the first Western woman to get her geshe degree, a German student of Lama Zopa's in Dharamsala, something like 19 years of study, and she finally got her geshe degree. So, and the nuns in Kopan Monastery, there's several hundred nuns there. Lama Yeshe Lama Zopa's monastery, and Lama Yeshe initiated the beginning of the serious studies for the nuns back in 1979 or something, which is very unusual for Tibet. Now it's not uncommon. There are many Tibetan women, Tibetan nuns becoming geshes. Anyway, the thing is, it's so important to understand the essence of it all. So this is where Lama Yeshe came in. Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa were the first two teachers I met, and they were one of the first ones to bring Buddhism to the West, Tibetan Buddhists anyway. But Lama Yeshe had this unbelievable capacity to just get it down to earth. Like any great scientist, any great scientist who writes a simple book about physics for ordinary people, they can explain it really simply. Because when you understand something, when it's your own experience, you can make it simple, So this is incredibly important. It's what Lama Yeshe did. And I mean, I see that so important for us in our culture, that we're so overwhelmed, we're so, dissatisfied, depression is common, suicide is common among young people. I mean, it's just unbearable, So what's the reason? Why is this, and what's the Buddhist approach to it? So, and this is what Lama Yeshe's skill was. He lifted us up, he made it seem possible. I'd sit there listening to all Lama Zopa's abstract, these complicated concepts, and then Lama Yeshe would come along and give a little talk, and I'd sigh with relief. Oh, thank goodness, it's possible. So it is possible. It is possible to present very simply the essence, the absolute essence of what Buddhism is about. So there's different views in Buddhism. So there's different goals. One goal is you call your own nirvana, your own cessation of suffering and its causes. And then there's another goal, a more expansive one that incorporates this incredible attitude they call in Sanskrit bodhicitta, which is this powerful aspiration, this courageous and brave and never-ending aspiration, wish to be of benefit to others, because your compassion is so enormous. So this is the two wings of the bird, wisdom and compassion. It's really such a nice analogy. A bird needs two wings, wisdom and compassion. So the thing that makes it so clear that the essence of it is simple is the word Buddha itself. I often quote this, but when we hear it, it tells us everything. The word Buddha, which, from the Mahayana point of view, is the two wings of the bird, that this is the end result. Now, if you heard the qualities of a person who'd fully developed their mind, because that's what a Buddha is, and that's what Buddha's talking about, the mind, it just sounds like science fiction. It sounds like a joke. It sounds hilarious, you know. But it's actually, this is Buddha's experience. Buddha's not a creator. And the point is, the word Buddha is so simple. The etymology of the first syllable, da, bud, and then the Tibetan equivalent, sangye is the Tibetan word for Buddha. And the first syllable implies the total eradication. Hear the words, they're so simple, but because they're so utterly different from the materialist philosophical, the psychological views and the neuroscientific views, that we literally can't hear it. We just literally can't hear it. The first syllable implies the total eradication from one's own mind, consciousness, and these words are used synonymously in Buddhism, the total eradication from one's mind, from one's consciousness, from one's very being, all unhappy ego, all fierce sense of separateness and loneliness and anger and fears and jealousy and depression and anxiety and arrogance and psychosis, whatever levels you want to talk about. All the terms in modern psychiatric volumes, thousands of mental illnesses. Buddha has found, this person in India has found, anybody who's done the job since then has found that these states of mind are not intrinsic to our being, are not essential to our being. They're not at the core of our being. So to even hear that, like I said, because the assumption, the views, for example, the views in Buddhism about what the mind is are very different from the modern ones. We have to talk about it, obviously. But the concept is pretty simple. If you think about, you know, we know anger, we know, we might not, you know, psychosis, whatever words you like, all these fancy Greek words we give to everything. Unhappy minds, basically distressed minds, disturbed minds, miserable minds, unhappy minds, crazy people, neurotic people, miserable people. Join the universe, you know, these qualities in our mind. And Buddha describes them in this simple way. It doesn't have any of the psychiatric terms that the modern people use. Attachment, anger, jealousy, these ones. It seems almost too simple. It seems like ridiculous. It seems like Pollyanna, doesn't it? Because we make it so much more complex. The Buddha has found that these are not intrinsic to our being, and that we can rid the mind utterly of them. Not only that, da, sangye, gye, implies that we can develop to perfection the other parts of our mind, which we all know. Love, compassion, intelligence, and so on and so forth. These words are incredibly simple, right? They're not a complicated concept. This is not a complicated concept. But as I said, so there's so much packed in that because and why is it so hard to hear? Because our assumptions that we're brought up with, it's okay, you know, the world is full of views, isn't it? Communism is a view of the world made up by humans, and Christianity is a view presented by humans. Look around the world over the centuries, humans have been very clever, and I have great respect for humans, we're all humans, have come up with bright ideas about how the world is, and trying to find the truth, trying to find reality, trying to find what happiness is, trying to find what suffering is. It's marvelous, it's a great pursuit. All the great philosophers, the thinkers, the religious people, and how dare any of us dare criticize any of them? We might not agree, that's perfectly fine. But to be so rude, especially the materialist philosophical viewpoints, which are prevailing these days. I mean, the arrogance of modern people who are philosophical materialists is that everyone else is stupid, you know, arrogant. But everybody thinks that. If you're stuck in some view that you think is the top one, everybody else is ridiculous. That's fundamentalism, isn't it? It's so rude, you know. Humans all over the centuries have come up with different ways of seeing the world, and many things they share. So here we're discussing Buddhas. And the best way to think about it is it's his view. How interesting. Let's have a look at it. But the trouble is, as soon as it smells of religion, and it does, I mean, I'm a Buddhist nun, there's Buddha, we're all prostrated, sounds like religion, doesn't it? Then we start to get paranoid, and we start to get kind of, it's fundamentalist, you've got to believe it, you can't question it, you can't prove it. These are very deep assumptions in our mind, you know, very, very strong. So we've got to question all these. But of course, the major point that's fundamentally different, that makes it seem a bizarre concept that you can get rid of all anger, all ego, all depression, all anxiety, all jealousy, is that we think the mind, we talk about the mind being the brain. These words are used synonymously, aren't they? So, you know, Buddha's view is very different. So this is where the Dalai Lama is so amazing. He doesn't come barging in and be all hoity-toity and say he's right and everybody else is wrong. He communicates with people. He's renowned for his incredible harmony. He talks. He's been behind unbelievable findings in the scientific world because of his discussions with scientists. And I mean, I know when I was in San Francisco running the prison project years ago, in the mid 2000s. We had a conference in about maybe 2007 or something, 2008, which is a replica of a conference one of our colleagues in Sydney runs our centre there, Happiness and Its Causes. So we invited, like 50 speakers over 4 days and so on and so forth. And it was amazing. Some of the top thinkers in this area, happiness and the neuroscientific findings and things from Harvard, from Stanford, from Berkeley, from different places, all of them had been touched by His Holiness and were just moved by the work they did with him that expanded their work. And so people are now finding, that so many of the ideas that the Indians, and this is as Dalai Lama says, it was these Indians more than 3,000 years ago, they were the ones who began the investigation into the nature of self. I mean, we probably thought it was Freud, So people are starting to see now, modern people, modern thinkers and scientists are starting to look at their assumptions, which is just marvelous. Even I remember a book when I was working on Lama Zopa Rinpoche's book about how to, face death without fear. It's just like a handbook of how to help at the time of death, And I read at the same time, it was reading while I was editing the book. I read a book by an American medical journalist called Nick Teresi, and he's a funny fellow. He's very funny. He's a medical journalist, and his expertise is death. So he'd written this book, The Undead. Not about zombies, It's his findings about all the contradictions and obstacles and difficulties now in the medical profession in relation to the area of where giving organs, cutting out organs and, donating organs to others. Because suddenly there's all these, for example, they're doubting, they're having start to question now their assumptions about what life and what death is. When does death occur? Which means what is the essence of life, Well, of course, the modern world says it's the brain. And when the brain stops and the heart stops, you're dead, mate. Well, for the Buddhist view, you're not. It's very clear. It can be up to 3 days before consciousness leaves. And the reason here, of course, is because Buddha's view of the consciousness, the mind, is utterly different. So to understand this concept, that you get rid of rubbish and grow the goodness, which all I'm getting at about this point is it's an incredibly hopeful concept. It gives you confidence. When you mean this depression I'm feeling, this anger I'm feeling is not at the core of my being, you mean like it can change? Already we can be hopeful, because this is why we despair, isn't it? So this fellow, he's a very funny fellow. He's wonderful, very humorous. He, one of the obstacles, for example, in the profession is that over the centuries, we all know in all cultures, there are always reports of people who, quote unquote, come back to life. They're in the coffin and they start breathing and knock on the coffin. Please get me out of here. This is not uncommon. It's a common experience. But of course, it doesn't fit. You can't explain that with the philosophical view of the materialist scientific view. You can't explain it. So we put it on the back burner. It's too difficult. But it's a real serious problem in this area, because when you stop breathing and you're going to give your organs, they keep you alive, they keep you breathing and your heart beating. So, there's a chapter in Lama Zopa's book, there's different scenarios of what to do if your loved one dies at home, what to do if your loved one dies in hospital, what to do if your loved one's going to give their organs. So, of course, it's a very difficult time, a difficult point, because the Buddhist view would talk about we've got gross consciousness, which is the sensory, how we live day to day. And that's what our brain is working and all the rest. But we've got they call it subtle consciousness, which is the mind that when we dream. But this can also occur at other levels. I mean, great meditators these Indians 3,000 years ago discovered this. We've got these subtler levels of cognition, these subtler levels of mind. So, of course, we think that's religion. So we put it in kind of airy-fairy. We can't prove it. But that's where all the discussions that Dalai Lama's having with all the best thinkers of the modern world. There's a website, mindandlife.org. Amazing conferences. They've all been published. The findings, all these findings about what, about now looking at when really death does occur. So one doctor in this book was quoted as saying, I can now say with certainty that consciousness is not a function of the brain. But I don't know, I know that. I don't know what it is, but that I can say. I mean, this is pretty tasty. People are questioning, and this is only now the knowledge in India I mean, what do we arrogant, Europeans know about, if we are European, let's say? What do we know about India? What do we know about Asia? What do we know about the knowledge in all the other countries? We're very, very arrogant, We think we're the smarty pants, and we track ourselves back to the Greeks. I mean, nothing wrong with the Greeks. They're the only wisdom we even pay attention to. But now they're paying attention to Indian wisdom, especially with Buddhism being popular in the West, So anyway, the point is, the Buddhist point, even if we're not sure what our mind is, I don't care if you think your mind's in your toenail. You can think it's in your brain. I don't care what you think. Just to hear that there's some body of knowledge that's been around for quite a while, that's been verified by quite a few people, and someone like the Dalai Lama, whom people seem to respect, would concur with, that says that you can not forget about even getting rid of anxiety and attachment and jealousy and pride, but can lessen it. This has to be hopeful. It has to cause us not to despair, even though the pain is very awful. And then, of course, without even having to think about reincarnation, which of course is the bigger picture in Buddhism, it's absolutely it's a fundamental part of the whole Buddhist view of what reality is, what happiness is, what suffering is, and what a person is. But even without even going into that, and the whole area of karma, there's so much you can learn and use in the Buddhist view about the mind and what's possible, how to be our own therapist, as she puts it, how to work with what's in our mind. So one of the first things that the Buddhist view says about the mind, well, apart from the fact that it's not physical, it's not the brain, it's not the handiwork of a parent, not the handiwork of a creator. These are pretty shocking concepts, because you either believe you're made by God or you're made by mummy and daddy, isn't it? In other words, you both share the one view that you track yourself back to someone else. That's the nuttiest idea for the Buddha. You track yourself back to yourself, he says. Okay, of course, this is where the continuity of consciousness idea and the concept of the second before conception, where do you track yourself, you track your mind back from now. It's a good meditation to do. You track your mind back. These thoughts and feelings and emotions, where do they come from? The previous moment. It's like a chain of mental moments. It's very logical. And where do they come from? Well, the previous moment. Where do they come? Well, the previous moment. And you get back, and you've got to get back to the first second of conception. So you've got to ask the question, where did that moment of consciousness come from? Well, the second before that, the egg was in mummy's body and the sperm was in daddy's body and whatever. But what about your mind? Well, it came from a previous moment of itself, that continuity of mental moments. So apart from all that, the actual view about the actual psychological model, the way the mind works, this is what's so fascinating. This is what is truly fascinating. The Buddhist view. And that's what we have to learn to investigate, and we can prove it. If this is true, that means you can know it, you can cognize it yourself, you can do it yourself. It's not something to believe in. This is not something to believe in. It's what we're so used to thinking. I've got to believe in it. No, you've got to look at it and unpack it and look at it and find it to be true for yourself. But it's difficult, because the key thing the Buddhists are saying, the key point he's making is you've got to ask the question, why should I get rid of anger, jealousy, pride, delusions, and all the rest? Why should I? What's the reason behind it? Well, the reason behind it for the Buddha is, first of all, because it's not at the core of your being, and because it causes you suffering, honey. I mean, most simply speaking, it's the cause of our suffering. But this is the part that's hard. What do you mean my anger is the cause of my suffering? My boyfriend is the cause of my suffering. What do you mean? My own capacity for joy is the cause of my happiness. The cake is the cause of my happiness. So this is one of the first problems. And this again too is a really powerful analysis. And we can prove this if we think it through. That Buddha's view is what goes on out there, which is all we ever, involve ourselves in from the first second we wake up until the time we go to sleep. We know that. As far as the Buddha's concerned, all the things and people and sounds and smells and tastes and objects of touch that we utterly, without question, absolutely assume are the main cause of my suffering and happiness. He says you're mistaken. It's not right. He's not being moralistic. He's just saying it's a mistaken analysis. This is something we can look at. This is something, and we can prove it if we think carefully. And then we have to join the dots, and then we have to apply it every day. And this is the part that's tremendously hard, because we get swept up in the dramas, in the conceptions, in the assumptions in our own mind, which we don't question. and we believe them, and then we go, you know, diving down into despair. So it's a question. Look at that. I think you can prove that any day you like. I remember two occasions in my life. I remember one time before I was a Buddhist, and I was in love with somebody, and we spent the time in the bush in Australia. It was right in the desert, which is like pristine. You know, I mean, 4/5 of Australia is uninhabited. A bit like California when people came along and then you irrigated it all. You know, you made it habitable. But much of Australia is just red desert. Okay, the Australian Aboriginals have very happily managed to live there for 40,000 years without distressing everything. But meanwhile, it's uninhabited. It's only, I mean, Australia's got 25 million people, I think it's less than the population of California, and it's bigger than the United States. You know, it's the oddest country. Now, what did I say all that for? Oh, yeah, I know, that's right. One time in my life when I was completely and had this relationship, and we were both, we'd hang out in the desert. We went near Alice Springs. It was completely pristine and divine. The sky was unbelievable. Such a special, special place. But because we were having suffering in the relationship, it was the worst suffering in my life. But the physical environment was pure and divine. And another time, I was living in New York City, which is, you know, one of the craziest cities on the planet. And it was one of the happiest times of my life. Because why? What was the difference? It was not the external condition that made me happy or unhappy. It was my mind. It was so obvious. It's staring you in the face. We have experiences of this a dozen times a day, but we don't join the dots. We don't get the learning from it. That's the part that's powerful. We can easily prove. I mean, we can also, because Buddha's point is that when you see, that the external event, the boyfriend leaving you, is merely, this is so shocking for us to hear, is merely the catalyst for the pain you're experiencing. It's not the main cause, and this is not playing with words here. Catalyst is a great word. It's merely the event that's triggered the pain in the mind. Tibetan's point here, it's interesting, mind, in your thoughts and feelings. Because the pain is the depression itself. The pain is the anxiety itself. The pain is the anger itself, the jealousy itself, the attachment itself. So that's why the job of being a Buddhist, because if you can get rid of this stuff, then you need to understand what it is and pay attention to it. And then the question is, well, how can you change anxiety? How can you change an emotion, you know? This is the other point that makes it very difficult. It's encouraging to hear that you can, but then you think, well, how can I change anxiety? It's you know, but this is where the problem is. You see, because we pay so much attention to the outside world, I mean, from the second we wake up, that's what we're preoccupied with, isn't it? We have to be preoccupied with, otherwise we'll fall over and kill ourselves. We've got to be, you know, keep our wits together. But we're obsessed with it. So so then what happens is this: we know the mind is chatting all day. From the second you wake up, and even during your dreams. I'm sorry, the mind never stops. We know that, except it's visual experiences, but the mind is doing its trip. And the interesting point is, for the Buddhist view, whatever we see or hear or taste or touch or smell, nothing goes astray. Everything is stored in our memory. And remember, we're not discussing the brain here. Just an aside, I would say, without insulting neuroscientists, that the brain is a physical indicator of what is going on in the mind, at least at the gross level, because Buddhism would assert these subtler levels. And our mental consciousness is for sure more subtle in the Buddhist analysis. We need to go deeper into the mind. So, excuse me. So because we're paying attention to outside, and then the boyfriend starts to say things, and we're freaking out and clinging and grasping, and we're panicking and listening to his words, seeing his face. And so what we're not doing is we're paying attention to him, but we are not paying attention to what's here. And this is Buddha's expertise, with greatest respect to Buddha. I mean, greatest respect to everybody else, Freud and Jung and everybody else. That's his expertise. And then we've got the potential, when we start to make that shift, it's like reversing the energy of a bomb, to pay attention to what's going on in here, and not just to watch it. That's nice, but you've got to understand it. You've got to understand it, and so you can unpack and unravel these thousands. There are thousands. I think even in modern psychology, they say there's 1,000 thoughts a second. Buddha agrees completely. But the trouble is, because we only pay attention to what is happening in here, when it comes to the surface and is powerful and is physical, and that's what we mean by emotion. You only know you're anxious when you're practically shaking. You only know you're having a panic attack when you can't breathe. You only know you're depressed when you're inert in bed. You only know you're angry when you're vomiting the words out your mouth and about to kill your husband, because we're not paying attention. So that's the job to do. That's the job that Buddha recommends. We have to start to learn skills that enable us to pay attention to what is going on in the mind. Now, when we think like that, we think of going to a modern therapist. And I'm not being rude. Marvelous people are therapists these days, and it's so experiential, and they're all wonderful human beings and help so many people. There's no doubt about it. But I'm just trying to describe the Buddhist approach precisely. Because our view in the West, because the neuroscientific view and the psychological view and the psychiatric views are all based on the modern materialist view that your mind is the brain, and then you have a brain, and then it comes from your mummy, and that all the training and all the education you've had and all the treatment you've had from the parents, and so it's events, past events, and your body and the external events. These are where you find the causes of your anxiety, the causes of your anger. Buddha says literally that's a mistaken concept. The cause of something that's mental is something mental. The external is true, is an event. An external event is a trigger, a catalyst, not the main cause. Like I said, there's not playing with words. So we obviously have to learn to, if this is true, we're going to experiment with it. We have to learn to pay attention before it becomes emotional. And that's Buddha's expertise. And this is the hardest job to do, because it takes an enormous effort to want to pay attention to our mind and to know what, and to have a confidence that we can do something with it. Because we can't, when the pain is there, all we want is for it to go away. We can't stand the pain. We know that. We will do anything to make it go away, which is why we kill ourselves. This is so tragic and so sad, because we can't bear the pain. So to start to look at it seems like torture. But this is a job we have to do, and this is a job we can do, So the other thing that's crucial to understand in the Buddhist analysis is that the anger, anxiety, when they're strong, we, as I said, because we only assert the physical, then we assume they're physical. Oh, look at this person. She's shouting, she's yelling. Look, Robina's angry. Look at her. You can see the spit coming out of her mouth. Her eyes are wide. You can imagine the heart is beating fast. The blood is racing. Her fists are flailing. We go, oh, she's angry. Well, anger is not the body. The body's not angry. The body just is the servant of the mind. The body and the speech, the body are the servant of the mind. Anger is in the mind. Anger is a mental state. Jealousy is a mental state. Love is a mental state. Yeah, because they're intimately connected to the body is affected. But that's only when it's an extreme. When, you really have very strong compassion, your body shakes or your tears come, isn't it? When you have very strong affection for somebody, you feel it physically. But because we're so addicted to our bodies, we only notice it when the body feels it. And that's just simply way, way too late. And the other thing that's an obstacle, I think, is how we mystify anything that's religious. So if you study the Buddhist, the model of the mind in the monastic university system, which is many of us study it now in the West, and much published, it's incredibly precise. It's really the precision and analysis and clarity that we know we need just to study cake making, the precision with the recipes, to play piano, those types of pursuits. We know you need clarity and precision and depth of analysis. That's exactly what we need to unpack and unravel our mind. It's not just a mystical thing. It's not just knowing how you feel. There's way more than that, So it is helpful to look back in your childhood. It is helpful to learn about your trauma. It's helpful to remember things. But from the Buddhist view, you don't need to do that. Because what you're trying to, this is where it's very shocking, you know. You go to, you go to your therapist. Why am I angry? So we look into the past, looking for the needle in the haystack. What happened? When did Robina start getting angry? How come she developed this habit? Of course, the external has a role. There's no argument. There's no denial. But the key thing that Buddha's saying, you ask Buddha, why am I angry? Why am I angry, Buddha? What's the cause of anger? Well, sweetheart, it's because you've got a habit in your mind to be angry. You were angry yesterday. Yeah, I know that. Why, though? Why? We keep asking for, we're not satisfied with that answer. But that's the answer. The answer is because it's a habit in your mind. So you've got to change your habits. It's a habit in the mind. It's almost too simple we can't even hear it. It's like a joke. It's like sort of mean. It's got to be more than that, surely. No. The answer is no. Anger, the habit to be angry, is the cause of why you're angry today. Why are you playing piano so well? You don't agonize about it and look into the past and wonder what happened. You know you're playing piano well today because you've been practicing it. It's hardly rocket science. But we think of emotions completely differently. We know why we're good at piano. We know why we're good at cooking. We own it. We're proud. I'm good at cooking. I've practiced for 10 years. That's why I'm good. No one's surprised. But I'm good at anger because I've practiced for 10 years. We're all very surprised. No. It's the boyfriend's fault. It's my mother's fault. This is deep in our bones. So that means we want to avoid the anger and we're trying to find someone out there. Or usually we have three methods, don't we? We have blame. That's our favorite. Or we have guilt, maybe that's the best favorite. And guilt is just self-blame. Or we have denial, because the pain is too much. And I'm not being sarcastic here. We deny, or we blame, or we get guilt. They're the only three options we have. And they're all nightmare. They're all nightmare. So if anger is one of the habits I can definitely tell you. I remember since I was a little girl. My mummy did not have to teach me. I promise. So what is it? Well, it's in the mental consciousness. It's not sensory. You see, you've got sensory consciousness and mental. This is very fascinating. I love discussing this. This is very, very fascinating, very telling from the Buddhist perspective. I always use the same example, my thermos, my trusty black thermos. I will look at this thermos, my eye consciousness, I go over here and I'll tell you, this is a really nice designed thermos. I really like my thermos. I'll say it's well designed, you know. So naturally, we assume the eyeball is seeing pretty thermos. No, don't be ridiculous. The sensory consciousnesses for the Buddha's analysis, when you study the mind in more depth, well, there's some very good books, by the way, that do go into it in more detail. One book by Geshe Tashi, published by Wisdom Publications. He was the Geshe at our center the Lama at our center for years in London. And he's got a series of books as part of a study course that he did. And the book is just called Buddhist Psychology. And it's by Geshe Tashi. And it is it's a detailed description of the etymological and the psychological models of the mind in Buddhism. It goes into more detail. It's very helpful. It's kind of what the framework that I'm using at the moment. It's a very good little book. So anyway, what am I saying? Okay, you got the sensory consciousness, and then you have your mental. And these are completely different for the Buddha, but we kind of think they're all the one because we just think ourselves as the body, you know? So eye consciousness can only see two things, can only cognize two things. The job of your mind is to cognize something. So sensory consciousness is profoundly limited in its capacity for cognition. This is very powerful, really. It can only cognize just a very few things. So eye consciousness can only cognize shape and color. That's it. So you've got to ask the question, this is the point. What part of Robina's mind is cognizing a very pretty thermos? Well, that's her mental consciousness. So what's happening, and this is not joking, I say it all the time, it's not joking. What happens is this: the eye consciousness goes to that shape and color, and in a millionth of a millisecond, my mind is quicker than Google. My mental consciousness is accessed, and then up comes a series of concepts, right? Opinions, viewpoints. What a pretty thermos. Eye consciousness can't see that. Our mothers would tell us that beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Okay, it's the eye of the beholder, but in the mind. It's so powerful. Our mental consciousness is what decides, has a concept, a thought. everything that goes on in the mental consciousness at the grosser level that we function in day-to-day life is the mental consciousness, and is all conceptual. We've got these subtler levels of mental consciousness in meditation when we can have more subtle experiences. Forget those. The level we function at, and this is very shocking to us, and this is really getting to the point I want to make about the unhappy states of mind, anger and anxiety and attachment and jealousy. We live at the level of conceptuality. So whatever we experience in our grosser level of day-to-day life, in our mental consciousness, besides our sensory, is conceptual. So what a pretty thermos, that's a concept. We get that. It's a concept. It's an opinion. 1 + 1 is 2. What's that? That's a concept. Guess what? It's an opinion, but it's a concept, an opinion we've all agreed upon. It's conventional reality. That color is yellow, as I look at my yellow cushion here. Yellow. That's a concept. Now, anger is a concept. How dare you do that to me? You are the cause of all my suffering. I want to kill you, for example. That's a very powerful set of conceptual thoughts. What's anxiety? Anxiety is like, there's a more subtle level of these things. We talk about the 3 poisons. Buddha talks about the 3 poisons, the 3 main unhappy states of mind that are the root of all the others. It's a very clear model of the mind that Buddhism has over these centuries. One is attachment, one is aversion. These are 2 of the main ones that we run between 1,000 times a day. If we understood this bit of analysis, this could help us this gives us a profound basis for understanding our suffering. So attachment is the root one, which is we're born with it. It's multifaceted. There's dissatisfaction. Then it's hankering, because if you're dissatisfied, you're missing something. So you hanker after something. And of course, the first thing is you hanker after the objects of the senses, because they're the most evident. They're not the only thing attachment hankers for. Then it manipulates to get the thing, and then exaggerates its deliciousness, and then anticipates it. All of this is a part of attachment. So this is running 1,000,000 miles an hour underneath everything we think and do and say all the time. It's very subtle, way more subtle than we think. It's an assumption. It's at the level of an assumption. The deepest assumption of this attachment is that, it can only bear the nice things. Attachment's a junkie that can only bear the nice things, nice smell, nice taste, nice touch, everything to be the way I want. It's very self-centered. It's embarrassing to hear this. And it's super subtle, way beyond what we'd think is conceptual, but it's programmed from countless lifetimes, Buddha would say, of practicing it. This emotional hunger is desperate to get only the nice things. Because why? Because that will then indeed trigger a pleasant feeling, and we all want pleasant feelings. It's called happiness. Now, what happens though, when this attachment, this emotional hunger, this little kind of unhappy vampire in us is desperate, just like junkie, desperate to have only the nice feelings, what happens when it doesn't get what it wants? Well, that's the beginning of the other state of mind called aversion. And that's multifaceted too. So the obvious volatile level of aversion is what's called anger, shouting and yelling when the body's involved. But there are more mild levels, and these are the ones for most of us that we have to start paying attention to. When you get annoyed, irritated, upset, frustrated, anxiety is all around about that level. When things build up, things aren't going the way you want. Things aren't going the way your attachment wants. And it's very subtle. You don't pay attention because it's small. We only pay attention when the boyfriend leaves you. We only pay attention when you break your leg. But we don't pay attention when you break the cup, or when little baby things happen. Little things build up, and we don't pay attention. So nothing goes astray until the anxiety comes, until the frustration builds. And then there's something that breaks the straw that comes and breaks the camel's back, and you want to kill yourself and kill your husband. This is working all the time quietly. This is the level that we have to start paying attention to. And because it's at this level when these things are manageable. It's like I said, I often use the silly example, but it's true. You've never heard of mechanics in your whole life, and you've got a new car, and you never thought of preventative. You've never learned to pay attention to what goes on underneath the bonnet, as we say in Australia. Hood here, isn't it? But then suddenly you notice the wheels are falling off and you're going 120 kilometers an hour on the freeway. Like, then it's a bit late, I'm sorry. That's our problem with emotions. And that's why it's so hard, because it's hard to deal with at that point. So when we start to pay attention to our mind, start to understand the distinction between the delusions and the virtues, and this is all the Buddhist view, before they get serious, then we can handle our lives. This is not a joke. We can then handle our lives. Time for questions. That's being a Buddhist. This is the job of being a Buddhist.
Venerable Robina, Cheryl has a question. Cheryl,
Good.
would you like to ask the question, or would you like me to read it?
Talk to me, sweetheart.
Cheryl, you need to unmute.
Hello, Venerable Robina. My question relates to the mind, consciousness, and conception. You had been discussing this. If you wouldn't mind, I need to access the chat because I cannot formulate the question without referring to it.
Sweetheart, just say,
I'm right there.
say your question. Just say something.
Okay.
I'll understand. I'll understand.
If mind is consciousness and not the brain, when conception takes place, consciousness attaches and then projects and identifies with reality and karma. So consciousness is not a being, it's an energy.
It's just your thoughts and feelings and emotions. Keep it simple. It's just your thoughts and feelings and emotions, Cheryl. And the Buddhist view, we've got some positive, happy, virtuous, reasonable, energetic, positive ones like love and compassion and intelligence and confidence and self-respect. And then we have unhappy ones, and we have to distinguish between the two. That's the essence of it.
I'm sorry, you had said to trace it back to before birth.
Okay, that's just another added point. And if you don't want to think about that, that's okay. That happens to be Buddhism.
No, I do.
Oh, okay, then wonderful. Well, then the Buddhist analysis is your consciousness is not so we've got basically for the Buddhist view, we've got the body and we've got the mind. Mind is the word meaning all your anger and feelings and thoughts and love and compassion and intelligence. Mind and consciousness are used to mean the same thing. So this is what the grosser levels of our mind, like anger and kindness that we can see every day. And we've got these way more subtle levels that we don't even talk about in the modern world. And so this is what the Dalai Lama said, these amazing Indians more than 3,000 years ago. They're the ones who created this technique that the world vaguely knows as mindfulness, which is really this brilliant technique that enables you to go to a subtler level of your mind. It sounds mysterious to us, but it's not. And so the point of the Buddha is that's the general point about the mind. It's more vast than we think. But the other point is, the crucial point is that for the Buddha, it's not a function of the brain. It's not the handiwork of a creator. And it's not the handiwork of your mummy and daddy. Mummy and daddy give you a brain and a body, no problem. But the consciousness for the Buddha, his analysis is, from his own observation, is that it's continuity that goes back and back before birth and a previous life and a previous life. And when we die, it'll continue on and on and on. And this whole concept of karma, which is really this view of cause and effect, and everything we think and do and say programs this mind. And so we create our own happiness and we create our own suffering. So we're like the boss. Dalai Lama said one time that reincarnation and karma are like self-creation. That's the essence of the Buddhist view, Cheryl.
Thank
Clear?
you.
Good, darling. Thank you very much. What else, people? Anything else? Ask me some questions.
Deborah has a question. Here, I'll read it from the chat. When one grows up, not been taught how to express needs and wants as an adult, one only knows how to get their needs and wants met by blaming. Can you say something about that?
Say the first part of the question.
Deborah, would you like to read your question, or would you like me?
I'd like to have a conversation with you, Deborah. It sounds very tasty. Come on.
Sorry. Yes. Yes, Venerable Robina. Yes. For example, as a child, I didn't learn, or I wasn't allowed to express my needs and wants. But then, as an adult, I noticed that because of that, it comes out as anger or blame.
Okay, so tell
I'm
me.
aware of that
now.
now.
So what do you mean? So you mean, are you meaning that like maybe your parents were very strict and kind of jumped on top of you and criticized you? And is that what you're saying?
Yes, my mother criticized, and my father was like, oh, get over that,
Okay.
lift up her lip
Okay.
and things like that.
Okay,
So that was
so
all.
maybe okay. So you weren't in other words, you were. So then that means okay. So that's right. So then someone being angry with us is very scary because it suffocates. It sits on top of us. We're not allowed to do anything, isn't it? So then, but you're saying that you feel that kind of behavior has caused you now to be angry. Is that what you're suggesting?
To be angry and then blame for whatever emotion or pain I might feel. I tend to blame more than to look at myself.
Okay, good, darling. Well, okay, Deborah, I think you're just the variation of all of us the same. Whatever our upbringing is, in one way or another, that's a very function. The function, like I was saying before, the function of the way ego works, the way Buddhism would describe, is that we either have a lot of guilt, we turn it all internally, I'm the bad one, or we get angry and you're the bad one. This is what anger is. But the analysis in Buddhism is more, yes, your parents might be that way, but what we need to look at, every one of us, including you if you're interested, is we've got to see what that anger is that frustration, that anger, that blame. It's coming from your attachment. So you could argue, using the Buddhist analysis, as a little girl, when your mother was mean to you, and it hurt you, it's true, it does hurt us. Why we get hurt is because your little girl in there, your little needy little girl wanting mummy to listen to you, and we've all got that. We've got the good part of ourselves and we have the unhappy part. And that's not how we tend to think in the West, because it sounds like it's blaming us, but it's not blaming. We've all got attachment, and the deepest attachment, the deepest hunger in us, Deborah, more than for sex or drugs or rock and roll, the deepest emotional hunger, the deepest neediness, the deepest attachment is to be approved of. And you didn't get that. You got the opposite. You got slapped in the face. So that cuts us down, So then that since tiny, then whenever that happened, you did arise anger, but you didn't express it. And now you're starting to see it. So in one sense, it's good that you're seeing it, because now you can work with it and start to take responsibility and start to know that anger is the response of your own thwarted attachment, your own thwarted neediness, which we've all got. We've all got this emotional hunger, and Buddha's saying that's the cause of the pain. So learning to lessen that means becoming more self-contained, more self-respectful, more grown up, and less blame and less guilt and more joy and happiness. That's the kind of analysis. So keep working, honey.
Thank you.
Doing beautifully. Good. Yes, Maddie. Oh, the Ace has got his hand up as well. Go on, Maddie, you first, then Ace. No, go.
Hello, Vulnerable Robina.
Oh, okay, Ace, go for me. Talk to me, doll. Yes,
Yeah.
How are you today?
Yeah, I'm fine. Thank you for your
Good.
teaching, and thank you for your email.
Good.
I just want to share a little experience because I have a question.
Good. Keep it short,
Yeah.
Ace. We're running out of time.
Okay. So 4 years ago, when I got up in the morning, I was depressed, and before I was heading at work, I went to the bathroom to wash my face, and I noticed that it was so hard for me to wash myself in the mirror, and I didn't understand why. After that, I just realized that I hated myself a lot. Okay, so my therapist told me that I should make a positive affirmation to myself before I go to sleep.
Yes.
The problem here is when I was telling positive affirmation to myself, the ego didn't believe
That's
on
right.
this positive
That's right.
affirmation. So
That's right.
how can I deal with that?
That's
how
right.
can I be in coherence?
I understand, Ace. It's a
Okay.
really good point. And all this is doing, pointing out is this, Ace. All that points out is that we've got such a habit to dislike ourselves. This is the irony of ego, that we don't like ourselves. We are not, this is what dissatisfaction is. We are dissatisfied with who we look, what we look like, how we are, our qualities, our achievements. When this is really severe, this is the most intense suffering, because that's such a habit. When you start to change the habit and you praise yourself, you just don't believe it, but we just got to persevere. All we've got to do is persevere, because you've got to use logic. Don't just make yourself like you think you're like some angel and you say silly words. You've got to be realistic. You've got to look at yourself objectively and see your good qualities. Like we've discussed already, it seems to me from the few conversations I've had with you, you've got good ethics. You've got you're ethical, you're kind, you're compassionate. Now, when I say those words to you, you know they're true, don't you? You have noticed those parts of yourself. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah, but you prefer to believe the bad ones. And the only reason is because that's our habit, Ace. So when we know it's a habit, when we know it's simply a habit, we know we can change habits. Because you're like sort of saying, I'm always hitting, like you're playing tennis and you go to your tennis coach and you're always telling yourself how bad you are at tennis. And your tennis coach says, well, no, you should tell yourself you're doing a good job, because you're doing quite a good job with your backhand, but you don't believe it because you just got to keep practicing. And eventually the good observation of yourself will start to become the one that you do believe. So you've just got to persevere. That's all. That's it, Ace. Don't concretize.
Thank you very much.
Don't concretize it. But that's what we do. We believe we are no good. That's why we kill ourselves. That's why we despair, because we believe those thoughts in our mind that we've been having for so long. This is the tragedy. So we have to be very skillful and very wise with ourselves. You can't change overnight, Ace. It's a slow, gradual process, like learning anything. It's slow and gradual. It's a really good.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ace. Maddie.
I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you. Talk to me, Maddie.
Yes, thank you, Venerable. I wanted to touch back on blame for a moment. I was wondering, is that blame, I have it here, is that blame the compilation of those negative thoughts?
Blame is simply anger. Blame, okay, putting it simple again. The two main things that the one main drive in us, this is, again, I have to keep saying it, it's not the modern psychological view. The energy is this constant dissatisfaction, which then hankers after something, which then always wanting something more. But whatever it gets, we're never satisfied. That's attachment energy. And we're always dissatisfied and always wanting this and wanting that and wanting approval and wanting the cake. And then when attachment doesn't get what it wants, that's called aversion. It's like it hits us in the face, and that's bad. And then aversion is anger and blame. The first instinct is, when something goes wrong, like you driving the car, you don't realize that when you're on the freeway, that you don't realize that you're constantly wanting the green lights. If you get off the freeway and you go onto the regular road, there's an assumption that everything will go smoothly. Attachment's so deep, it's an assumption that the traffic will be perfect, that no car will interfere with you, that the lights will be green, that everything will be lovely. Attachment's a junkie for everything to be lovely, and it's an assumption. And the second the red light comes, the second the guy jumps in front of you, swear and shout. So anger, blame, and even annoyance, irritation, frustration, and even anxiety are thwarted attachment. It goes at quite a subtle level. Are you with me?
Yes, Venerable, thank you.
Good. Okay. So that's why we've got to watch our minds like a hawk and work every second. And that just takes time. To delve deeper itself takes time. And then to begin to hear the mind working like this is quite subtle, it's quite subtle. So give ourselves time. It's almost time to go. Look, 4 minutes. One more question. No more questions. Well, just close your eyes, sit up straight, or sit up relaxed, do what you like. And just simply watch your thoughts. Don't try to conjure any thoughts. Don't try to think what the thoughts are saying. Don't have a conversation. Don't worry if you can't find any thoughts. Just for 3 quality minutes, pay attention to whatever your mind is doing. Just pay strong attention. Just let the thoughts come and let them go. Just watch. Just keep the mind focused. Just pay attention. Okay, it's about 3 minutes, 3 minutes. So we just delight. This hour, this 60 minutes has gone like a dream, hasn't it? So quick. So any of the things that I said, any of those words, and I'm listening very carefully myself, I tell you, that makes sense. But, you know, get some courage from it. That we can unpack our minds. We can learn to understand them. Yes, we can look into the past as well and look at the events, but this is a very tasty, direct job to look into the actual conceptual stories in our own mind and unpack and unravel them, and then argue with them or change them, reconfigure them, because they're not set in stone. And the key thing that Buddhism says is all the unhappy ones are all distorted and exaggerated. They exaggerate. So we have to learn not to believe them. This is the practice every day. Have confidence. And then start to realize we've got extraordinary potential, extraordinary qualities. That's really powerful. Thank you, everybody. So kind to everybody. See you all sometime again. Much love, everyone. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you.